Is it a bad thing that health insurance is directly tied to employment? Does physical exercise tend to make people less woke? And is money a database? We'll talk about these questions and more on today's episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the podcast where we gather takes and arguments from all across the internet, and we break down whether we think they are good or bad, and obviously try to explain our position. My name's Britt. I'm here with my co-host Donnie, and before we get started, make sure to like, share, subscribe. It really helps us out. You can find us on Instagram at Good Take, Bad Take Pod, and on Twitter and YouTube at Good Bad Take Pod. And without further ado, let's get into some of these takes. So the first one is kind of a thread of tweets. So we've got Brianna Wu, former libertarian, right?
Oh no, I
No?
very well. I'm not sure. I know she's always been a progressive. I think she was
Okay.
the one, if I'm not mistaken, around Gamergate stuff.
Oh, okay. Maybe not, maybe so. I'm not sure. But anyway, she tweets out, I am progressive. I want universal health care, economics centered on the working class, and a deeper conversation about how women are treated. What I didn't sign up for with that is cowering daily to a frequently abusive mob of anonymous accounts to the most extreme position. And then a Twitter user replies to her, and he says, he first puts a picture of a past tweet that she made, which is, hello, I am a progressive. Can you help me understand what legal rights asexual people don't have? I would love to stand with you, but I need to understand the problem. And this person replies with that saying, I keep seeing this. Progressives and allies are expected to do their own work instead of putting the burden on marginalized folks. Replace asexual with any other group, say black or women, and your tweet sounds like something, quote, just asking questions, unquote, white man would ask. What do you think?
This is such a bad take, and it's funny because so Brianna Wu's take here is very much the trend and trajectory you're going to see with every subset of ideologue in a younger age range that's growing older. So, I would say I think Brianna Wu's probably a millennial in our general age range, probably a little bit older, but and politicians, it's easy. Politicians, you sell out, you change your position, you pretend like you've had it the whole time. Look at Biden, right? There's no way in heck anyone actually believes Biden is for all these progressive ideologies. He's literally on record being opposed to so many of them. But the difference is with an ideologue, you actually, believe in this thing not just as a will to power necessarily. And I'm not saying this is indicative of everyone. I'm not saying this is indicative necessarily of Brianna Wu, but you're going to keep seeing this general trend where it's, kind of the memes about like the left eats their own, except it's not a meme, it's a reality. And so you see this thing where, Brianna Wu is trying to say, I want these things, I really want to understand these or support these values that when I was coming up in the progressive movement were the staple values: universal health care, working class economics, general feminism. And then the younger, like Zoomer, Gen Z, even young millennials are now coming up and pushing the boundaries further and further into now you have radical trans ideology to the point where they are eating their own. And she's saying, hey, can we cool it and back down? And then this guy comes in and he like feeds that exact narrative where he's like, yeah, it's actually really problematic that you're asking for clarification on why someone may or may not need help in this, like what you're asking, hey, what's your position? And that's offensive because you're expecting people who are asking for something to have the burden of explaining it. I mean, it's absurd. It's the same kind of logic that belies people who don't want any kind of control for, like, say, women who are making an accusation of rape. Obviously, victims are already victims, and you should not put them in difficult positions if possible. But you also can't just rely on people to be 100% truthful in these situations without any shred of evidence and just label accusations. You have to give benefit of the doubt to people. They can't just be, guilty until proved innocent. And so in this, it's this exact same rationale where it's like, hey, this person's claiming they don't have rights. And if you ask, oh, what rights don't you have? Now you're putting a burden on them, and that's hateful and rude. And so it's just a terrible take. Obviously, the burden, if you are making a request, if you are making a claim, the burden is on you to explain that, to expound that. And so in a sense, when people ask, it's not my job to educate you. Actually, it is. If you're saying that you need some legal system, you need some right granted to you. You need some compensation for your time or actions. Actually, the burden is on you to explain and to educate, because otherwise we can never know if it's legitimate or not, really.
Yeah, and I know we've had some criticism of like MLK Jr. before and stuff about some of his relationships with women, but like he put forward a very strong argument, right, for desegregation, one that was both appealing to the emotion as well as just appealing to just the logic of it, and to a principle. And so you are better off regardless of whether or not you think it is your duty to to answer or educate people. You're still better off doing it, because even if you don't convince the person you're trying to quote unquote educate, you're going to convince people around them, right? They're going to see the unreasonableness of the person that is disagreeing with you, and they're going to see whatever sort of thing you are trying to put forward if it's a great argument. Usually the only people that don't want to argue, the people that don't want to explain things, the people that don't want to educate, are the ones that actually have no educating to do. They just have a will to power. And that's what's really, I find really, I agree with you. The take by the dude is a bad one. But what I find really interesting just about this overall situation is that I don't think humans can ever get away from having some inkling of a desire and a need to have a moral grounding and principle in their lives. So you see Brianna Wu, you know, obviously during her time had a very very oriented towards like a will to power type of ethos, but there was a little bit of principle grounding within it. And the thing about a moral philosophy and an ideology that it's really underneath all of it is just a will to power, is that the most extreme position, the most aggressive position is the one that usually wins, right? And so you're inevitably the person who is progressive and whatever today is bound to be centrist or conservative, tomorrow or next year. And so it's really funny to see it move away from these people and then not to realize that, like, oh, like at the core of what I was doing was trying to get power. I wanted to take the position that gave me the most, ability to look down upon people, to lecture them, to act like I have the superior moral argument about something without any actual, basis in reality. Because I'm sure Brianna Wu would make the same sort of back in the day when she was holding these positions that might not have been that long ago about universal healthcare. It's like, well, it's not my job to educate you why people should be taken care of, right? Like that's a very similar thing that you hear people saying or used to hear people say about universal healthcare. But she, when this ideology starts to aggress upon little key tenets of her, how she views the world, suddenly she realizes the error of her ways, but maybe not enough and a little bit too late.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so I think you're right. It's one of these things where the funny thing about the ideologues is they are rooted to this framework no matter what, right? They're not going to be thinking critically. And so even in her first thing, she's asking, what help me understand why you're correct. And that's not a bad question to ask, but the framing is very much of the position like, you are right. I just need to know why, rather than actually trying to uncover the truth and facts. Now, again, nothing wrong with that. I've asked questions in that way to things too. Like, I generally believe this, but I'm not totally sure why. Let me back it up. So, like you're saying, there is this need for moral framework, I think. But then that moral framework is ever going to slip. It's ever going to shift because it's not grounded in something that is eternal. Because progressives are always going to just push the boat, push it forward in whatever the direction is of quote unquote progress, without an actual understanding of rights of what your core end goal is, really. Because progressivism is always just moving forward, but quote unquote forward, but there's not really an end goal unless it's just power. And that's what the
Yeah.
people at the top basically are able to use, right? They find the people who are motivated, who are passionate, and then they use them so that they get on top, like the Black Lives Matter organization, and then they cash out.
Well, it's you can see this in something as simple as like the moral philosophy of like aesthetics, right? Which is like how do we determine what and is and why something is beautiful? And there's lots of different philosophical schools of thought on that. And like precision or eternal forms or things like that. But when you apply that to, let's just say, transgender people, uh, it's like they don't. from our moral philosophy and our understanding of aesthetics, you and I would not agree that a transgender person can be beautiful because they're not living according to their design, to the form that they were put in. But people will say all the time, progressives will say all the time, "Oh no, no, the transgender person is so beautiful." But one of my favorite little trends that occurred in the past few months is people going to females or cis women who say that transgender women are beautiful and saying, "Hey, you look like a transgender woman," and seeing what they say. And it's like, oh, they actually don't, they take offense to it because in reality, they don't actually believe that. They're just saying it because it gives them a leg up. It has some sort of shock value. It has some sort of ability to give them the more like, oh, I have this cool position and you don't. It's You're a Community fan, right? The show Community.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, it's just like it's like when Britta is trying to date the gal, when Britta and the gal are both dating each other because they both think each other are lesbian, but they're not, right?
Yeah.
Because they just want to make some sort of moral statement and show everyone that they're really cool, but they're actually both straight. But they want to have that moral position, so they act out this whole worldview that they don't actually believe. And so eventually, though, if you continue to act that way and progressivism continues towards power, eventually it's going to run into a wall with you, at least, that you're not willing to cross. And unfortunately, Brianna Wu, or maybe fortunately, is encountering that right now.
Absolutely. Well said.
All right, moving on to our next one. We got a Twitter user who tweets out, "The hateful right will no doubt make a huge deal about the Philly shooter being a transgender and a BLM supporter. Even if that turns out to be true, we still want the gun they use banned, and they won't be invited to be a speaker at a lefty conference." What do you think?
So his snide remarks here are clearly a an attempted jab at Kyle Rittenhouse,
Yes.
who defended himself and was invited to speak at places because of that. The funny thing to me is, I mean, there's a couple things here, but maybe the lowest hanging fruit and not central to the point, but I do want to address just because it kind of makes me laugh, is the fact that the only reason Kyle Rittenhouse was invited to speak at events is because of the absolute insane backlash he received from the left, who were denying his legitimate reasons for self-defense. It's like people will make a martyr and then decry the fact that the martyr is being revered by the people. It's like, well, what did you expect when what would have been a normal, hey, he defended himself, good for him, that we should all strive for that. Then it would have been dropped. Kyle Rittenhouse would not be a household name. But the fact that they tried to frame him as this horrible thing and he had to stand up and defend himself in courage, that's what made him a speaker to begin with. So again, not the core tenet of this post, but I just wanted to address, like, they're acting, it's like you shoot yourself in the foot and then you're like, oh my gosh, woe is me, I have bullets in my foot. Yeah, I wonder how they got there. You don't get to act like you're this moral high ground when you were the very people who put Kyle in a position to be speakers at events, acting. And then of course there's just the clear obvious difference between going in to an area, looking to shoot people up who are innocent, and defending yourself running away. I mean, there's just night and day differences. Obviously, I almost feel like it's stupid to explain them.
It's this is like a little bit culty in a way to me because like this person has come to the conclusion in their mind that I don't really know much about the Philly shooting, but
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, you
assuming.
didn't, because they were a cross-dressing BLM
Oh, yeah.
supporter. I don't know. I never found out if they were actually transgender or not, but they were a very big fan of cross-dressing and
And
things like that.
how many folks were killed in that? Hopefully, not many.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It was several. I'm trying to remember. I again,
Five
there was,
people, five
yeah,
people, and four
5.
wounded. So
Yeah.
obviously, when it's like, how can you equate that to the situation with Kyle Rittenhouse? Like, it's all the folks who criticize Kyle Rittenhouse, and I have people that I know personally that I'm friends with that were when Kyle Rittenhouse was let off and found innocent. They were like, "It's a dark day for justice." And I was like, "Did you watch like any of the videos? Because we have video evidence, like the most clear evidence you can get in to make a determination about whether this was self-defense or he was actually doing some sort of manslaughter, or if he was it was like actual murder." And most of them said no. And, or some of them said, "Oh, well, it doesn't matter, like he killed a bunch of black people." It's like, no, he didn't kill any black people when he was at that protest. They were all white people. One of them was a pedophile, and they were all trying to kill him or hurt him. So it's one of the clearest and most most easy to determine cases of self-defense because we have it all on video.
Yeah.
But these people only have the ideology that like whoever is in my group is okay, and I'm going to either make excuses for them, I'm going to say that they are innocent, or I'm going to minimize what they did, or have a little bit of whataboutism, to borrow their term. And if anyone that is not in their group, it does not matter how justified their actions were. It's going to be that they are bad, no matter what. And it's kind of a terrifying thing to think about, like being potentially tried for some sort of crime in like New York or even here in Washington State, because you know you're going to have a jury of peers who are part of this cult. Like they do not want to let you off because either they truly have bought into this and they lied to and deceived themselves, or they are so scared of the people around them and they want to keep saying yes even though they know it's not true. Because we have a lot of people, like I was just talking about in the last post, like they will say that transgender people are beautiful even when they truly don't believe it, but they'll say it because they're either they want the power or they're so scared of the people around them and not being accepted. And so that's this post like weirdly terrifies me a lot, because it's just like it's so willfully blind, and it makes so many false equivalencies to cases that it's like clearly one was just and the other is a clear act of evil. Both unfortunate, both very sad, but that is not something that you make a moral determination based on.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, for people who are skeptical about, oh, like the justice system is focused on the law and things. A court in Washington, I don't remember, it may have been the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court. I do not remember exactly, but there was essentially a ruling that now made it so that the burden of racial motivation in a case, right? To say,
Yeah.
was this a hate crime? It's now presumed that it was racist intent unless proved otherwise, which is absurd
Wow.
and is actually an absolute gut punch to the idea of innocent until proven guilty. The burden of proof has been completely flipped around. It's a pretty terrible standard, and that is, so you think like, okay, well, this guy is a fringe guy, he's an ideologue, whatever. This is the court system that's supposed to uphold and enforce the law to the Washington state constitution. And where do you think people like these ideologues go? They don't live in a vacuum. They influence people. Those people grow up, they become justice, they get involved. So it's pretty scary when you think about it in that way. But like you said, the willful blindness and ignorance is just incredible. Now the one thing that I will say I do like about this take, the one thing that is good about it, is I think he is making a good argument to show that he is being consistent in some cases, which is to say, we're owning that this person who might on some superficial levels be associated with our movement, we still think that the things that allowed this to happen should be, right? He's showing that through the principle. He's not making excuses to say, well, the person wasn't a real BLM supporter, wasn't a real transgender. He's saying, yeah, this thing was bad, and we still hold our position. Now, I disagree with the position. I disagree with pretty much everything about it, but I at least want to acknowledge that he isn't trying to sweep under the rug some of the other things about it that would make it inconsistent. So that's at least a little bit better. It's a less like whataboutism than it appears on its face. It is a whataboutism, but not quite as bad as others could be. So kudos there, but mostly an absolutely terrible take.
Yeah. All right, moving on to our next one. We've got Austin Allred, and he tweets out, I can't get over how stupid it is that employment and health insurance are so directly tied together in the United States. If you lose your job, you lose health insurance at the precise moment you lose the ability to pay for health insurance. What do you think? Is it stupid?
Yeah, actually it is. I think this is actually a
Yep.
good take. I don't know if, his ending point implies anything beyond. It's funny, my shout outs to my brother, he sent this in and he was thinking that maybe the ending was implying like he thought there should be some kind of universal or free option. I didn't read that, so I'm not going to speak to this guy's intent, but I think the plain language and the plain reality that he states here is true, and it is an absurd, crazy thing. And for those of you who are not aware, this surprise, surprise, is a result of government intervention in markets, right?
Yep.
So in 1942, you have World War II sort of on the looming over the U.S., and the world is in kind of in chaos. And so I believe it was 1942. It could have been a little bit after, but at least in 1942 is when it was talked about or considered. Um, and because of this, there started being supplies rationing and like wage controls put in place, price controls and wage controls put in place in the U.S. economy. And so employers wanting to still attract employees and reward them and prevent them from leaving said, okay, well, we cannot raise your salary any higher by law. What can we do? And so they said, we're going to offer fringe benefits like health insurance, because that way it's a company expense. We pay for it and they get the monetary value of that without me raising your wage. And then you have this cycle where the government then said, okay, well, that will be tax deductible. Like that won't count as taxable income for your employees. And so then that created an incentive for insurance markets to jump in with employment. So more employers started doing this. And then after the war ends, they codified it into law on a grand scale. And so now, instead of having an actual market that came up naturally because it made sense, you had a market that came up because of a government restriction and then government incentives for it to continue. And now you have this absolutely backwards, goofy system where you can pay for health insurance, but it becomes exorbitantly expensive for individuals because you have massive corporations buying this and providing this by law. And so now you've artificially increased what should have been a bonus. It's kind of like if you jack up the price of coffee makers for individuals if you made it so that every employer had to buy their employees a new coffee maker every year. And then the demand for coffee makers go up. Coffee makers themselves know that by law, these companies have to buy them. The companies have the capital to buy them. So they jack up the prices of all their models. So yeah, you can still buy a coffee maker if you're not employed. It just costs 3 or 4 times as much. That is the system that the government directly contributed to with the health insurance market. And so this guy is absolutely correct. It makes no sense. And in many places, when you lose your health insurance because you lose your job, you can't afford new insurance, not because you don't even have savings, just because it's so stupidly pricey because of this artificial messing in the market.
Yeah, the insurance itself is supposed to be a fairly straightforward calculation for both the provider and the person that wants to be insured, the insuree. It's that, hey, I'm one of us is going to take a bet on, we're both taking bets on whether or not we're going to use this. And based on your risk profile, they might set their premiums X amount high, and they have some sort of actuary to calculate that out. And then you're calculating about whether you think you are going to need this, or just what the value of peace of mind, quote unquote, is going to be to have it. And hopefully no one is correct, right? You never have to use it because you never want to have to use your health insurance. But in the event that you do, you want to use it. It's supposed to be straightforward based on your risk profile. But like you were saying, once the government started getting involved, started setting even something that was not even directly related, right? They started meddling in the wages. It's like, okay, well, we need, employers need to start providing value someplace else, and then the government has to get its grubby hands on everything. And now, because everyone has to be insured, right? Insurance in its purest form should work that some people are uninsurable, right? Because some people are so risky, or they waited too long to get insurance that the insurance company cannot afford to pay for them. But unfortunately, because of all the intervention, and I know that being mandatory to have health insurance at the federal level was done away with. I think it was like 2019 or 2018 or whatever it was, is gone. It's still, there's a period of time where it was mandatory to have it, right? So health insurance companies, one, like you're saying, there was the demand for it because it was artificial, so they could jack up their prices. But two, they also they had to subsidize people that were above risk onto your actual premium, right? So you couldn't have a health insurance company that was only insuring people that were low risk, which would mean that you would have lower premiums. Everyone had to insure everyone at some point. And therefore, you were literally paying for someone else's health insurance that might not have taken care of themselves. So as with all things, whether it's in the financial markets, whether it's in, the manufacturing markets, or it's in the insurance markets, anytime government steps in, artificially increases or decreases demand, or increases or decreases supply, or increases or decreases incentives, you get an incorrect calculus, and everyone ends up paying more for it. They have less quality from it, and it's less accessible, because like good quality is less accessible. Like I think about, I have a family member, who had the foresight in the early 2000s to pay for long-term disability insurance. It was fairly cheap. He was very young, so it was awesome. But when it came time, there's a little bit of fine print, right? This person had some issues that they needed to hop on it, and so they were able to get Social Security, social disability that they've paid into for 40 years. And then he also thought, oh great, I can also collect on my health insurance or the long term disability insurance. But there was a nice little waiver in there that said, hey. If you're receiving social security disability payments, we're going to deduct that from the total that we you moving forward, which is an awful thing, right? No one is a good guy in that situation. The health insurance company is a jerk, but they can only get away with that because the government isn't involved, right? And if the government hadn't been taking money, the Social Security and the Medicare tax and federal income tax and all this stuff out of this person's paycheck, and this person had invested it, they would have so much more money to be able to take care of themselves. But because they've meddled in it, they don't get the freedom of the money that they could have had. They also don't get the benefit of paying for private insurance because someone else is subsidizing it, and they also don't reap the full benefit of the Social Security because it's not worth as much because the Federal Reserve is printing money and devalues all the money that you put into it in the first place. So it's just a bad situation all around. And yeah, it's really dumb that our employment and health insurance is so directly tied together. And I think this person is trying to kind of make a socialist point, but it's the government's fault. So the answer to it is not more government.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and to round out your other point, when they did repeal the law, and like you said, obviously you've been covering other people's costs as well. But even if you weren't, even if let's just assume for the sake of argument that you weren't covering other people and it was just like supposed to reset the market because now it's no longer mandatory. Think about how markets actually work.
Yeah.
If you have all of these people who are getting this benefit, all of these employers who are currently paying for it, it's not a good economic thing for you to do for your employees to suddenly stop offering that benefit. And so you still have this massive consumer base buying into the prices. There's no incentive for the insurance companies to lower their prices until people start to leave. But there's no incentive for companies to leave this market because it's an expectation all of their competitors do it. So you've just artificially created this sort of market to exist at the prices it does. Just because you've removed the legal mandate now doesn't reset the market to pre-law mandate levels. So it's messed up whether or not it's current or not. So I think that's just kind of
Yeah.
a goofy way to think about
All right. Moving on to our next one. We've got a Twitter user, Fisher King writes, physical exertion, bodybuilding, long distance running, whatever, tends to make people conservative, or at least not woke, because it forces them to confront the reality of their bodies and their limitations. It's harder to dream utopia when you run up against your own limits. What do you think?
I think this is a great point. I also think it is a point that is reinforced by the media narrative right now. If you look at all these articles that are
Yeah.
coming out saying things like the white supremacist link with working out and the white uh, fascist obsession with athleticism or whatever these ridiculous articles that are coming out have, I think you're like, maybe there is something to this because it feels like oftentimes the media corporate media narrative will either try to bury something, or if it's too prevalent to ignore, they start attacking it or praising it if it's a bad thing, like here's why I don't know, inflation's a good thing, so when they're acknowledging something, it's important to pay attention to it as either this is bogus if it's a good thing, it's probably a good thing if they're saying it's a negative. And so I think his point here about acknowledging your limits and utopia, I think that's part of it. I also think that it actually demonstrates the intrinsic reality of there is like you can't just acquire fitness without effort. And so I think it also ties back to the being in touch with reality to a point where most white collar jobs do not have anymore, and most students do not have, where you do something physically in a world and there is a series of reactions and you directly see a causal result that gives you an improvement. And that flies in the face of sort of leftist narratives in general, which is there's nothing you can do, you're a victim to the system, you're a victim to
Yeah.
your circumstances, and nothing you can do overpowers that. It's a racist society that's pushing you down. It's not your fault, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not to say there aren't external factors that matter, but I think when you work out, you can see that, oh, I once was weak in this way, And maybe, like the other funny thing is like athletes are born not made, right? Like there are some people who just by the placement of their muscle tendons on their arms, just the moving of up an inch makes them worse or better as an athlete for a specific sport, right? But that doesn't mean that even if you are horribly not fit to ever play professional soccer, that you can't get better at soccer. And that's also defeating the narrative, I think, of the left, which is, in broadly speaking, if you are in a place of disadvantage, it's the system keeping you down and there's nothing you can do. And working out gives you that tangible link of like, no, when I do something, there is a direct result action from that thing, and I can be self-reliant to improve. I can move beyond whatever limitations I may or may not have, and I don't need the help of other people to do that, which is entirely defeats the purpose of a government stepping in and taking control of your life and your family's life.
Yeah, I think that at the core of any sort of utopian ideology that believes that we can make society into one that is perfect and that everyone's needs are provided for and that all suffering is limited. I think at the core of that is pride and
Yeah.
arrogance, because it assumes that you have the ability to, or that someone, maybe not you, but someone that you're able to identify at least, has the wisdom to take in all factors and make all things come true. And the core aspect of any sort of big physical exertion sport, for me right now it's like martial arts, is humility, right? Like you show up and there is always going to be someone better than you. You're never going to be the best person in the room, and even if you ever do become the best person in the room, not even the best person in the room but the best person in the world, you're not going to be there very long. Like someone's going to come up and is going to be much better than you at some point, and you're going
Well,
to
and just
degrade. Go for it.
and not to mention, even if you are the best, you can get beaten, right? Just being the
Yes,
best isn't enough.
exactly.
You have to maintain it. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And so, it forces you to become humble, because especially if you want to grow, right? You have to fail over and over and over and over again. If you want to run a marathon, you have to first be able to run 5 miles, and if you want to run 5 miles, you got to be able to run 1 mile, right? And you're probably not going to be able to run 1 mile if you haven't run ever in your life, for a long time. You're going to have to walk part of it. And so you fail over and over and over, and you keep failing until you reach your goal. But even then, your goal is the failure for someone else that has a further along goal than you, right? And so you run, like this guy's saying, you run into your limits, and you realize that, like, oh yeah, there people have different goals, they have different motivations, they have different convictions, and everyone is trying, in at least in the sport, is trying to work towards it. And some are going to succeed and some are going to fail in each day. But what matters is showing up. And when you show up, you have some control over whether you're going to get better. You might not be better than the person next to you, but you're going to be better than who you were last week, right? And that ability and that confidence that is gained makes you not want to rely on anyone else to take care of you, which is at the ethos of dreaming up a utopia. It's that we can select someone to take care of us. We can't. And not only can we not select someone to take care of us, there is no one that can take care of everyone. There is no utopia. So I really love this take, like you're saying, especially in the, I think maybe kind of wise insight by the media that physical fitness is an extreme right position. I actually agree with them. It is very much an extreme right position right now. It's anyone that believes that they can take control of their body and their own destiny, with just a little bit of effort and showing up and discipline. That apparently is the extreme right now. It has made people that want to be based in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, moving on to our very last one. We've got Doge designer, and he or she or whoever this is tweets out a video clip of Elon Musk, and they have the quote from the video. So Elon is saying, "People get confused sometimes. They think an economy is money. Money is a database for exchange of goods and services. Money doesn't have power in and of itself. The actual economy is goods and services." What do you think?
I think that's a pretty good description. I think, when if depending on how actually you want to get, I do think that the definition that when I first learned about economics being, the study of human action, that actually was pretty impactful to me to understand. Oh yeah, because I think he's correct in that so many people just kind of assume by default, oh, economics just means money, and that's just
Yes.
not what it is. Economics is the study of human action, because every choice you make has a reaction. Every choice you make means that there's necessarily another choice that wasn't made. There's so much that goes into these kinds of things, and that is what the economy is. It's individuals making choices, saying, "I will do this thing. I will create that thing. I won't choose that thing. I won't buy that thing. I won't exchange these things." And so I think when he says, goods and services, I think that human choice is included in that. I think it's a little bit
Yes.
more broad than just goods and services. But broadly speaking, he is correct here that is mostly what the economy is going to be. And so I think that that is an important thing to think because, in particular, with like people talking about COVID when they're like, oh, but what about the economy? Like, as if that wasn't a genuine concern. It's like, no, the economy is human action. It's how humans aggregate goods and services, how they distribute them, how people can eat. That is the economy. It's how people can eat, how people can have shelter, how poverty can be alleviated with goods and services. So yes, it is an important thing to consider. And so I think rather than thinking of the economy as like the monopoly man sitting on his pile of dollar bills, when you realize it's no, that's the chicken that gets to the grocery store that goes on sale, and so the person who just got laid off can actually buy that and feed his family. That's the economy. So I think this is a pretty good take.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty good. I think, and I'm gonna do a bit of the actually that
Yeah, yeah,
that
of
you were
course.
mentioning, but I think it's good in that the average person who doesn't nerd out over this stuff like you and I do, who isn't going to read the hundreds and is even thousands of pages of Mises, like it gives them a good understanding of like and a good way to interpret how silly the argument that, oh well, it's just the economy, bro, when we shut down shut down the economy, like people's lives matter. It's like, no, the economy is us, right?
Yeah.
What I don't like about this take necessarily, and where I think it's a little inaccurate, is that money doesn't have power in and of itself. So money, he's right that money is kind of a database, but it's primarily a method of exchange, right? For people in the way that, like, I don't want to have to calculate what ratio of chicken to internet is for me to exchange. Like, money is kind of that common denominator. The value of money is that it is a store of value. Everyone wants it at all times. That it is something that we can actually devise, and it has some sort of ledger to it, right? It's trackable, and it stores, over time. That's why gold is a fantastic actual money, right? It can be melted down. It can be made into smaller shapes. It's kind of wanted across all time. It has a universal recognition that it is valuable. Whoever has that method of exchange and has a lot of it and has dictated that it is the preferred way to exchange value and value between people, they do have power, right? They have a lot of power. The reason the United States is in such a great position, the reason the United States has been able to live, I shouldn't say great position, has been able to live beyond its means, is because the dollar is the preferred exchange currency on the foreign markets, because we enforce it with the petrodollar. We say, foreign countries, if you want to buy oil and gas, you have to do it in US dollars. And because US dollars are mandated for oil and gas, which is a really in demand commodity, it makes our dollar have a lot of purchasing power because we have a lot of it and we can just print it, right? So it gives us a lot of power on the economic stage. So that's the only thing I don't like about this take, is that money might not have power in and of itself. That's not exactly true. Like, if you look at money as just the US dollar, like, no, like if you have a lot of US dollars, you actually have a lot of power because it everyone wants it. It's liquid. It's really in high demand. But in general, I think it's a good take because it helps people think about things more clearly than less clearly.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very good distinction, right? I think that this saying money doesn't have power also might be a more cold, calculating, secular kind of understanding. Whereas if you think about life in a more three-dimensional way, you understand that things that don't inherently have power can have power. Just because, for instance, I don't have a legal contract that dictates, I don't know, that my friends will hang out with me, but just by the very nature of being a well rounded individual and being kind and treating others with respect, that has a power in and of itself to draw people to you, right? there's nothing that inherently gives me power to and to want people to like spend time with me or something. But if I'm being nice and kind and virtuous, I do have a power to draw people to me, right? There are power dynamics with things that aren't explicit or outright or legally dictated, and money, I think, is probably the oldest form of that, because money is just shorthand for value, for power, for a comedy, a shorthand for power in a sense. And that's why biblical texts say, the love of money is the root of all evil. Money has power inherently because of the human will to power. In many cases, humans own natures are tempted by things. I mean, illustrated so beautifully in like Lord of the Rings. Like human human nature is controlled by things that may not otherwise legally have power. It's like there, if you think of it about in terms of Lord of the Rings, there was nothing that made the ring legally so attractive to all these people, but it was that human inclination to drawing towards it, because of even before um Smeagol knew what it could do, how it was power. He was drawn to that, and that's how people are to power in many ways, and to money. The human heart is not always rational or logical by these things, and so I think that when you look at the world, money is a power, and it does have power in and of itself, because it represents power in many ways, and that is human nature to want to drive towards that. So I would agree with you there, and maybe push back on his claim there.
Yeah, and I think I would add on to it because he makes a claim later in this interview that like, and we've used this claim similar to make other points, but that if you're stranded on a desert island, like you don't want a dollar bill, you want a cheeseburger, or you want
Yeah,
water
yeah.
or whatever, and that's a fair point. Um, and I think it like I was saying, it illustrates the foolishness of saying like, well, we can shut the economy because it's just money. That's not true. It's like the economy is producing things. It's people making decisions, and part of those decisions is producing stuff. But where money does have power is that, like, let's say you have you're living in a community or whatever, and everyone makes their own thing, right? Everyone makes carrots, and someone makes plastic, and someone makes phones, and someone makes pies and stuff like that, and then someone makes I don't know, someone makes some shiny thing, right? And everyone wants that shiny thing. Like, even though everything like might have, even that shiny thing might have the same amount of purchasing power uh towards the carrots as the phone has towards carrots in terms of ratio or whatever. The fact that that shiny thing can purchase anything it wants and everyone wants it means that the exchange and demand for that one thing gives the person who holds that more power, right? And that's why dollars have more power. That's why when I've got like I remember purchasing from Public Surplus this soundboard back when I was in college, and I drove all the way to Idaho to get it, transported back to Washington, and I bought it for like $100 over there because the government really sucks and gets rid of things that it shouldn't get rid of, or should have never bought in the first place with our tax dollars. But they're really valuable, and like soundboard's really cool. But it took me about 9 months to move it because the amount of people that want that specific soundboard that I bought is much less than the amount of people that want dollars, because dollars can buy anything you want. Whereas that soundboard, I can't go trade it for a laptop. I can't go I couldn't even go trade it for a pizza if I wanted to, because the people that make pizza don't want a soundboard, but they do want dollars because they can use that dollar to go buy, a laptop or whatever sort of thing that they want. So that's where the power of money actually is, right? It's that you have something that can be traded for anything. It might not even have the same amount of ratio of like trade, like amount of like, if I have $1, it buys the same amount of this as if I had something else. But the fact that it's universally desired makes it powerful and valuable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, literally speaking, yes, a dollar bill does not have inherent power, but I mean, that just kind of ignores the invisible reality behind what a dollar is and means. In the same way that he kind of defines the economy is not just money. Economy is goods and services. You also recognize that money is not just money. Money is value and power and
Yeah.
representation of that. So,
Yep. Yep. And money only matters if there are goods and services to buy.
yeah,
So
right.
yeah. So it's overall it's a good take. But yeah,
Yeah.
I just my pedantic self needed to make that point.
And that's
Uh
totally fair.
awesome. I don't have any more on this unless you do.
No, I think we're good.
Cool. Well, friends, thanks so much for hanging out. We really appreciate it. And we will catch you on the next one.